The Treasurer argued repeatedly yesterday during the budget lockup that he had successfully navigated Australia on this narrow path, that the country was going to have a soft landing and had managed not to go into recession and avoid, a hard landing where it needed a recovery. What's your response to this analysis?
Well, we haven't gone into a recession for two principal reasons. One is that they've allowed the population to grow so strongly through excessive migration. So that inflates the gross economy. We've had per capita income declines, per capita GDP declines, but the absolute size of the economy has gone down. And then in terms of what's happened in the labour market, over 80% of the jobs created are what we call non-market jobs. So they're basically government-funded jobs. Now, they're not all government jobs, but they're jobs like in aged care, childcare, the NDIS, where they're basically funded by the government. And, there does come a day of reckoning with that. And, of course, we've had the most appalling productivity record to the point that the current level of productivity is actually back where it was in 2016. So that is contributing to the decline in living standards, which we see in the per capita declines in GDP.
As a budget document, we know this was hastily pulled together. We know there were no plans for a budget. Usually in budget lockups, you get dozens of press releases with various announcements. We didn't have that yesterday. There weren't many new announcements. From your analysis of these budget papers, did it look to you like it was quite thin?
Well, there was clearly stuff in the locker. I mean, I think the Treasury at that level is quite a professional outfit. So the preparation of a budget is, a very disciplined time path arrangement. And basically they bung in certain things at the very end. But this was with the expectation of there not being a budget. That process at the end was very rushed, and you could tell, really. And there's some clearly silly things in this. I mean, for example, there was all this sort of discussion about, uncertain global outlook and the dangers and China growth falling and stuff. But then when you went and looked at the GDP growth, the economic growth, it seemed to be extraordinarily optimistic, 2.75%. That would be amazing if we achieved that. So there was, I think, some inevitable inconsistencies. But, really my major criticism was that this was a budget for Labor and not a budget for Australia. And it absolutely shone through that aspect.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it was definitely not just a political document, but a reflection perhaps of the Treasurer himself, Labor values, something for marginal MPs to sell during the campaign. Judith, I just want to return to the question of this $1 trillion debt. And in the conversation I had before with Richo, I don't know if you heard it, but he said Australians don't care about the level of debt, as if this means the Treasurer shouldn't care either. But in your column today, you're saying this isn't just an economic issue. You're saying debt isn't just an economic issue, it's a moral issue. Can you expand on this?
Well, basically you're spending today and sending the bill to future generations. So there clearly is a moral issue to that. I mean, do you think, your young children and my grandchildren, when they're in their 30s, are they going to be thinking, gosh, I'm glad Jim Chalmers gave my parents a tax cut and some electricity price relief? I don't think so. So, perhaps if some of the spending were what you might call productivity enhancing or real investment, it might be different. But a lot of this is essentially going on what you might think of as the grocery bill. So I think this is a really big issue. Now, I don't entirely agree with Richo because, I come from Victoria and the state of public finances in Victoria are absolutely shot. And it is beginning to affect public opinion. People, when they tell me that, the new Sunshine Station is going to cost $6 billion, you think, really? And I think, as I understand it, Michael Kroger knows this much better than I do, that Labor is travelling very badly in Victoria. And one of the reasons is that people have begun to feel very uncertain about the the state of the public finances of Victoria, and that then I think, will eventually filter into concerns about the state of public finances in Australia.
Judith, I think that was such a good point you made there when you said that a lot of this debt is being accumulated because the spending is going on effectively grocery bills or the cost of living crisis rather than productivity enhancing or nation building reforms. I think that is just an excellent point. Judith Sloan, thank you very much for your insights.